Whispers in the Wind, an Air Force pilot's near miss with a covert narcissist. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to specific individuals or events is purely coincidental. The sun dipped low over Eglin Air Force Base, casting long shadows across the tarmac, where F-35 fighter jets stood poised like predatory birds. Major Carl Thomas walked briskly towards the hangar, the scent of jet fuel mingling with the salty breeze from the Gulf of Mexico. At 36, Thomas was the epitome of an Air Force pilot, tall, athletic, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had been top of his class at flight school, his skill in the cockpit matched only by his dedication to duty. Eglin was a sprawling base nestled in the Florida Panhandle, surrounded by dense pine forests and the shimmering emerald waters of Destin's beaches. The local community thrived on a mix of military families, tourists drawn to the white sandy shores, and locals who had lived there for generations, their lives intertwined with the ebb and flow of military deployments. As Thomas made his way to his office, his thoughts drifted to his wife, Carla. He had met her 4 years ago during an exchange program in Colombia. She was a former airline flight attendant with flowing dark hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of his soul. Their meeting had been serendipitous, a chance encounter at El Dorado International Airport in Bogotá, where her laugh had caught his attention amidst the bustling crowd. They dated for a few whirlwind months, the passion between them igniting like a jet afterburner. Carla was vibrant, full of life, and her stories of flying across continents captivated him. They married quickly, a small ceremony overlooking the Andean mountains, her family embracing him as one of their own. Now, they had 2 children, Lucas, aged 3, with his father's inquisitive eyes, and Isabella, just turned 1, her giggles the music that filled their home. But beneath the veneer of a perfect family, shadows lurked. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Facade. Thomas arrived home that evening to a quiet house. The scent of jasmine from the garden wafted through the open windows. He called out, "Carla? Kids?" No response. His heart tightened. It wasn't the first time he had come home to an empty house, but it never ceased to unsettle him. He found a note on the kitchen counter, written in Carla's elegant handwriting. "Went out with friends. Mrs. Henderson next door is watching the kids. Don't wait up." He sighed, rubbing his temples. Mrs. Henderson was a kindly widow in her 70s who adored Lucas and Isabella. But it wasn't fair to burden her so often. Carla's nights out had become more frequent, her excuses thinner. Later that night, after retrieving the children and tucking them into bed, Thomas sat alone in the dimly lit living room. The mantel was lined with photos. A smiling Carla on their wedding day, Lucas's first steps, family outings to the beach. Happy memories that felt increasingly distant. The clock chimed midnight when he heard the front door creak open. Carla stumbled in, the scent of alcohol preceding her. "Had fun tonight?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. She glanced at him, her eyes glassy. "Don't start, Carl. I'm not in the mood." "We need to talk about this," he insisted. "You can't keep leaving the kids with the neighbor." She laughed, a sharp edge to it. "Oh, so now you're concerned about the kids? You're never here." "I'm on duty, Carla. You know that." "And I need a life," she snapped back. "I'm not some prisoner here to cater to your schedule." He took a deep breath. "This isn't about me. It's about responsibility." She rolled her eyes and staggered towards the bedroom, leaving him alone with the mounting tension. Chapter 2. Unveiling the Truth. Weeks turned into months, and Carla's behavior grew increasingly erratic. The late-night outings, the unexplained expenses, the unfamiliar men's cologne lingering on her clothes. Thomas tried to ignore the signs, clinging to the hope that things would improve. One afternoon, as he was preparing for a training mission, he received a call from Mrs. Henderson. "Major Thomas, I hate to bother you, but could you pick up the children? I have a doctor's appointment." Confused, he replied, "I thought Carla was home today?" There was a pause. "Oh, dear. She dropped them off this morning and said she'd be back by noon. It's nearly 3 now." A knot formed in his stomach. "I'll be right there." He picked up Lucas and Isabella, their innocent chatter a stark contrast to the turmoil inside him. That evening, when Carla finally returned, he confronted her. "Where were you?" he demanded. She shrugged casually. "Out." "Out where? You left the kids all day." "Why are you interrogating me?" she shot back, her eyes flashing with anger. "Because I'm worried about you. About us." She scoffed. "There's nothing to worry about. You're overreacting." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Are you seeing someone else?" Her expression shifted. A flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossed her face before she masked it with indignation. "How dare you accuse me?" "Please, Carla, I need the truth." She threw her hands up. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing someone. Are you happy now?" The admission hit him like a physical blow. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being alone," she cried. "You're always gone, and when you're here, you're thinking about flying or missions or anything but me." He clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. "We can work through this. For the kids." She laughed bitterly. "Work through what? There's nothing left, Carl. Face it." Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Despite the betrayal, Thomas couldn't bring himself to leave. He suggested counseling, time apart, anything to salvage their marriage. Carla agreed half-heartedly, but her actions spoke louder than words. The affairs continued, her drinking worsened, and her moods swung unpredictably from tearful apologies to venomous attacks. One night, after returning from a mission, Thomas found Carla passed out on the couch, empty bottles littering the floor. Concerned, he tried to rouse her, but she pushed him away, muttering incoherently. As he cleaned up, he found her phone buzzing with messages. He knew it was wrong, but he looked. The texts were explicit, detailing meetings with multiple men. His heart sank. The next morning, he confronted her again. "We can't go on like this. I think we need to separate." She looked at him through bloodshot eyes. "You're leaving me?" "I think it's best for both of us, for the kids." Her expression darkened. "You can't do this to me." "Carla, please." "No!" she screamed, hurling a glass at the wall. "You can't leave me." He stepped back, shocked by the intensity of her reaction. "Calm down." "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I swear it." Chapter 4. The Accusations. The following day, Thomas received a summons to his commanding officer's office. Colonel Anderson was a stern man in his 50s, with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol. "Major Thomas, have a seat," the colonel said, his tone unreadable. Thomas sat, anxiety gnawing at him. "Is there a problem, sir?" Colonel Anderson folded his hands. "Serious allegations have been made against you by your wife." "Allegations?" "She's accused you of sexual assault, fraudulent activities concerning your basic allowance for housing, adultery, and other offenses. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. Sir, that's not true. Office of Special Investigations is looking into it. Effective immediately, you're grounded and relieved of your duties pending the investigation. Sir, please. Major, this is a serious matter. You will comply with all directives from OSI. Dismissed. Thomas left the office in a daze. Outside, the Florida sun seemed unnaturally bright, the sounds of the bass muted as if underwater. He couldn't believe it. Carla had followed through on her threat. Over the next few weeks, his life became a nightmare. OSI agents questioned him relentlessly, their demeanor accusatory. He was barred from his home, forced to stay in base housing. Word spread quickly among his peers, whispers replacing camaraderie. He reached out to Carla, but she refused to speak to him. Instead, she had embedded herself within the base community, befriending Colonel Anderson's wife, attending social events, painting herself as the wronged spouse. Chapter 5. The Legal Quagmire. Thomas decided he needed legal representation. He hired a local civilian lawyer, Mark Reynolds, who had a modest office in downtown Fort Walton Beach. Reynolds was a former JAG officer, now running a small practice handling military cases. Don't worry, Reynolds assured him during their first meeting. These things blow over. Just cooperate, and it'll sort itself out. But as months passed, Thomas grew increasingly frustrated. Reynolds seemed disorganized, missing meetings, failing to file paperwork on time. Meanwhile, OSI built their case, and Carla's allegations multiplied. She claimed he had been abusive throughout their marriage, that he had defrauded the Air Force by misreporting their housing situation, that he had committed adultery, ironically accusing him of the very sin she had committed. Her family arrived from Colombia, taking up residence in his home, their disdain for him palpable. They supported Carla's every word, adding their own fabrications to the pile of accusations. Thomas felt isolated, betrayed not just by his wife, but by the very institution he had devoted his life to. He knew he was innocent, but the weight of the allegations, combined with Reynolds's ineptitude, left him feeling helpless. Chapter 6. A Ray of Hope. 14 months after the ordeal began, Thomas received notice that he was to be court-martialed. Desperation drove him to seek better counsel. Through a fellow officer, he was referred to Jennifer Harris, a seasoned civilian defense attorney known for her tenacity and expertise in military law. Meeting her at her office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the Choctawhatchee Bay, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope. "Major Thomas," she greeted him, extending a firm handshake. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and an air of confidence. "I've reviewed your case file. You've been dealt a bad hand." "Can you help me?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. She nodded. "I can, but we have a lot of work to do, and not much time. First, tell me everything." Over the next few hours, he poured out his story: the whirlwind romance, Carla's behavior, the accusations, the ineffective defense by Reynolds. Jennifer listened intently, taking meticulous notes. "Your previous counsel should have challenged these allegations more aggressively," she remarked. "I trusted him," Thomas admitted. "I thought it would resolve itself." She gave him a sympathetic look. "Unfortunately, in cases like these, you can't afford to be passive. But we'll do everything we can to turn this around." Chapter 7. The Trial. The courtroom at Eglin Air Force Base was austere, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. On one side sat Carla, impeccably dressed, her expression a mask of composed sorrow. Her family flanked her, their gazes steely. Behind them, members of the base community who had been swayed by her narrative. Thomas sat beside Jennifer, his uniform pressed, but his eyes weary. He glanced around, feeling the weight of judgment from those he once considered friends. The prosecution presented their case with confidence, calling OSI agents who testified about their investigation, citing supposed inconsistencies in Thomas's statements. Carla took the stand, her performance convincing as she recounted fabricated stories of abuse and betrayal. When it was Jennifer's turn, she methodically dismantled the prosecution's case. She highlighted flaws in the OSI investigation: failure to interview key witnesses, reliance on hearsay, and a lack of physical evidence. "Mrs. Thomas," Jennifer addressed Carla during cross-examination, "you claim that your husband was unfaithful. Are you aware of the consequences of adultery under the Uniform Code of Military Justice?" Carla feigned innocence. "I am." "And yet, isn't it true that you engaged in multiple affairs during your marriage?" Carla bristled. "No, that's a lie." Jennifer presented phone records, text messages, and witness statements that contradicted Carla's denial. The courtroom murmured. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, "isn't it true that you stand to gain financially if Major Thomas is convicted and discharged?" Carla hesitated. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Under the Transitional Compensation Program, you would receive a portion of his pay for 3 years, correct?" Carla's facade cracked. I suppose." Jennifer pressed on. "Isn't it also true that you have been coaching your family to support your false allegations?" "Objection," the prosecutor interjected. "Sustained," the judge ruled, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Chapter 8. Verdict and Aftermath. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated. Thomas sat alone outside the courtroom, staring at the horizon where the blue sky met the emerald waters. He thought of Lucas and Isabella, their lives uprooted by circumstances beyond their understanding. The verdict came: not guilty on all charges. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered by the realization of what had been lost. His reputation tarnished, his career stalled. Though acquitted, the stigma of the accusations lingered. Jennifer joined him outside. "I'm glad we could prove your innocence," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. "I don't know how to repay you." "Just take care of yourself," she advised. "And remember, sometimes the battle is only half the war." Epilogue. Months later, Thomas stood on the balcony of a small beachfront apartment in Destin. The salty breeze ruffled his hair as he watched Lucas and Isabella play in the sand below, their laughter carried by the wind. He had been reassigned to administrative duties, his days of flying curtailed indefinitely. The Air Force, wary of controversy, had sidelined him despite the acquittal. He knew his career would never be the same. Carla had returned to Colombia, her lies exposed but unpunished. The divorce was finalized, custody awarded to Thomas. He focused on rebuilding, finding solace in his children and the simple pleasures of the coastal community. Destin embraced him, a town of friendly faces, vibrant sunsets, and a slower pace that allowed for healing. The locals, a mix of retirees, artists, and fishermen, welcomed him without judgment. In the evenings, he would sit at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, sipping coffee as the boats returned with the day's catch. He befriended a group of veterans who gathered there, sharing stories and offering unspoken support. One night, as the stars reflected on the gentle waves, Thomas contemplated the lessons learned. He thought about the importance of acting decisively, of not taking innocence for granted in a world where perceptions could be skewed so easily. He remembered Jennifer's words, "Sometimes the battle is only half the war." He resolved to move forward, to find purpose beyond the cockpit. Conclusion. Major Carl Thomas's story is a testament to resilience in the face of betrayal and injustice. His journey through personal and professional turmoil underscores the importance of vigilance, the perils of misplaced trust, and the necessity of taking immediate action to safeguard one's life and career. In the quiet moments by the sea, Thomas found a new mission: to raise his children with integrity, to rebuild his life on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom, and to let the whispers in the wind carry away the echoes of the past.